Hello, I'm Tom Wilkinson, and welcome to the Thinking in English podcast, a podcast aimed at intermediate to advanced level English learners. On April 12th, the Muslim holy month of Ramadan began. Millions of Muslims around the world are now fasting, observing the religious holidays, and celebrating with friends and family. In this episode of Thinking in English, I want to answer some of the most common questions people have about Ramadan, as well as introducing you to some religious vocabulary. But first, why not follow the Thinking in English Instagram page, Thinking in English podcast, or the link is in the description. Full of great vocabulary content. And you definitely should look at our blog, thinkinginenglish.blog, for all transcripts and bonus content. Here is today's vocabulary list. As always, the written list is available in the description of the podcast and also on our blog, thinkinginenglish.blog. To observe. To observe. To observe means to obey a law, rule, or custom. For example, people must observe the law. To fast. To fast. To fast means to eat no food or drink no liquid for a period of time. For example, 1 day a week he fasts for health reasons. Practicing. Practicing. Practicing as an adjective means actively involved in a religion, as in, he is a practicing Christian and goes to church every week. Holy. Holy. If something is holy, it is related to a religion or a god. For instance, the Quran is the holy book of Islam. Sacred. Sacred. If something is sacred, it is considered to be holy and deserving respect, especially because of a connection with religion or a god. For instance, this area is sacred to Buddhists. Pilgrimage. Pilgrimage. A pilgrimage is a special journey made by a pilgrim, often connected to religion or spirituality. As in, Muslims try to go on a pilgrimage to Mecca at least once in their life. Dawn. Dawn. Dawn is the period in the day when light from the sun begins to appear in the sky. I wake up before dawn every morning. And finally, crescent. Crescent. Crescent is a curved shape, like the moon, when it is less than half of a circle. For example, the moon was a brightly shining crescent. On April 12th, the Muslim holy month of Ramadan began and is likely to be observed by over 1 billion Muslims around the world. Even in a global pandemic, with lockdowns, quarantines, and social distancing requirements common in many countries, most followers of Islam will still observe Ramadan in some form. Some of the listeners of this podcast will certainly be involved in this month's celebrations. And in that case, you probably know more about Ramadan than I do. So send me a message if I make a mistake or get something wrong. Some of you will have friends, colleagues, or neighbors celebrating and fasting. So it might be really useful to know a little more about their holy month. And maybe some of you don't know any Muslim people or anyone who observes Ramadan. But with over 1 billion people in almost every country in the world, fasting, celebrating, and joining in with various festivities, I think it is interesting for everyone to learn about this important part of international religion and culture. Now, to be perfectly honest, I'm not a Muslim. I don't observe Ramadan, and I'm certainly not an expert in this issue. But I do have friends who fast every year, and because of them, I have gradually learned some information and traditions. When I was working as a language teacher in Japan, one of my colleagues, actually my only British colleague, was a practicing Muslim and therefore strictly observed Ramadan. I remember sitting in a small Indian restaurant, which was the only restaurant in our entire city that sold halal meat so my Muslim friend could eat. And we were waiting for the sun to set so we could eat together. I think it was his first time observing Ramadan away from the UK, and the hot and humid weather of Japan, as well as being away from his family, made it quite difficult for him. The rest of my colleagues and I tried to support him, but we also had many questions and things we didn't know. Like, what actually is Ramadan? Why do people fast? What are some traditions people follow? Is there anything non-Muslims should do or not do when we are around our Muslim friends during the month? So, if any of you ever find yourself in a similar situation to I did, hopefully this episode will answer some of these questions and be of some use to you. So, let's start with the basic question. What is Ramadan? I'm sure many of you have heard of this before, but how much do you really know? Ramadan is the holiest and most sacred month of the year in the Islamic calendar. Muslims believe that it was during the month of Ramadan that God told the Prophet Muhammad part of the Quran, Islam's holy book. The Prophet is reported to have said that when the month of Ramadan starts, the gates of heaven are opened and the gates of hell are closed, and the devils are chained. Throughout the entire month, followers of Islam fast every day, from sunrise to sunset. This means they don't eat any food or drink any liquids during daylight hours. The month is an opportunity for Muslims to think about their relationship with God and their religion, to pray more than usual, to study their holy texts, and to be more charitable and generous. However, it's not just a serious holiday. It's also a time of celebration where families and friends come together to eat, have fun, sometimes give each other presents, and spend time with their loved ones. Moreover, at the end of Ramadan, there is a big holiday, known in English as the Festival of the Breaking of the Fast. I mentioned fasting a few times already in this episode, and for many people, the only thing they know about Ramadan is fasting. But how does fasting work? And why do Muslims fast during Ramadan? Well, fasting is one of the 5 basic duties of Islam. The duties are faith, prayer, charitable giving, making a pilgrimage to Mecca, and fasting during Ramadan. All Muslims are expected to fast every year, and it's a fundamental part of their religion and their religious beliefs. Of course, if you are too young, too old, ill or pregnant, or have some other special circumstance, you're not forced to fast. What is the purpose of fasting? Well, in my research and according to some friends of mine, there are a few different reasons. It reminds you of how weak the human body is, and it reminds Muslims how much their body depends on their God to live. It allows you to experience how the poor and needy feel when they are hungry and thirsty. And it allows Muslims to focus on their relationship with God. So now we know a few reasons why people fast. What does fasting actually involve? Well, during Ramadan, Muslims do not eat any food, drink any liquids, smoke cigarettes, or engage in any sexual activity during daylight hours. You also can't take medication or even chew gum. If you do any of these things, your day of fasting doesn't count and you start again the next day. What do Muslims do during a normal Ramadan day? Well, I asked a friend this question, and this is what he told me. Muslims wake up early in the morning before dawn to eat their first meal of the day. As they can't eat or drink anything after dawn, they will usually consume a lot of food before the sun rises. Muslims are supposed to continue their usual routines, like work or school, while they are fasting. My old colleague worked at a school from 8 a.m. until 5 p.m., as usual, during the month. Once the sun sets, most Muslims will eat a small snack and then perform their evening prayers. And after they have finished their day's praying, they might eat a large meal with their friends and family. One of the things that confuses many people is the timing of Ramadan. It actually changes every year. This year, Ramadan began on April 12th, but I remember my friend fasting during the middle of summer a few years ago. Why do the dates change? Well, Islam has a religious lunar calendar based off of the moon. And this calendar is actually 11 days shorter than the standard Gregorian or Western calendar. This means that the first day of Ramadan moves backwards by about 11 days every year. When Ramadan is in the winter months, the shorter days and the cold weather make it a little easier to fast. But when Ramadan is in the summer, the longer days and the hotter weather make it much more difficult to fast. And especially when you live in a very hot country. I guess if you think about Saudi Arabia, it's probably not easy to fast in that country. Whereas in the north of Europe during winter, when the days can be really short, sometimes less than 6 hours, in Denmark or Norway, probably a lot easier. The exact start date of Ramadan each year can actually be confusing for Muslims as well. As the month of the Islamic calendar starts on the new moon, Ramadan must also start on the new moon, right? Well, actually, no. This is wrong. Traditionally, Muslims would wait until they could see the beginning of the crescent moon. The new moon is often difficult to see, so they would wait a few days until they can see it. And now there is a debate between different religious experts whether they should use the scientific calculations about the moon, so they know exactly the time and date when they should start fasting, or whether they should wait until it is visible in the sky and a religious expert can view it. So it can be really difficult for Muslims to know the exact date Ramadan starts. In fact, one of Google's most searched terms every year is Ramadan start date? You might know that there are two major Muslim groups, Sunni and Shia. Both fast during Ramadan, but there are a few small differences. Apparently, Sunnis usually finish fasting exactly at sunset. So when the sun is no longer visible, but there is still some light in the sky. While some Shia Muslims wait until there is no visible light at all. Shia Muslims also have an additional holiday during the Ramadan month. So how can non-Muslims like myself and maybe some of you listeners be respectful of their Muslim friends during Ramadan? If you live in a Muslim country, it can actually be a crime, or if it's not a crime, really rude, to eat or drink in public during daylight hours. So even if you're not Muslim, be careful if you live in an Islamic country. However, this is certainly not the case for most of you listeners of this podcast. And my friend gave me a few tips on how to be respectful during Ramadan, especially if you have friends observing the month. You could try not to eat or drink in front of them. Take your lunch if you're at work or your snack and eat somewhere different and leave your colleague in peace. And definitely remember to not offer food or a snack. Sometimes people will accept things without thinking. And, if your Muslim friend accepts your snack without thinking, this would mean that they have to fast for an extra day. And maybe you could learn a traditional greeting to wish your Muslim friend a happy Ramadan. So here is today's final thought. On April 12th, over 1 billion Muslims around the world began observing Ramadan. In this episode of Thinking in English, I thought it would be a good idea to introduce some of the traditions, history, and some useful information about this Islamic holy month. Are you observing Ramadan this year? Do you know someone who is fasting? Does your religion, your culture, or your country have any special religious or spiritual holidays? And if you do, please message me and tell me what they are. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Thinking in English. Please share with your friends, check out our social media links in the description, and send us a message. We really appreciate all of your feedback. And if you have any ideas for topics or future podcast guests or any other learning format, please let us know. And please leave me a rating. We're now on Instagram. I'm sure you've already seen it, but go there, check it out. Lots of good content about vocabulary, pronunciation, and grammar. And Instagram is a great way to contact me. It's Thinking in English Podcast on Instagram, or the link is in the description. Also, all of the transcripts of the podcast are now available on the Thinking in English blog. Vocabulary list, comprehension questions, and all of the articles are there for you to read. That link is also in the description, so please check it out too. Thank you, and see you next time.